After his inaugural campaign in 2022, where the USC Trojans went 11-3 and played in the Pac-12 championship game, USC had a bit of a reality check last season, and that's an understatement. USC was preseason rated in the top 10, and at one point they were inside of the top 5 before falling out of the top 10 in October and falling out of the polls completely in November. They finished the year 8-5, 5-4 in conference. They scored 41.8 points per game in 2023, which was the third best scoring offense out of 133 teams, and actually a slight improvement compared to 2022's scoring offense. But the 2023 defense allowed 34.4 points per game, which was 121st out of 133 teams. In the preseason of 2023, I actually predicted that USC's defense would regress and that it would allow over 30 points per game, which is an insane prediction because typically Power 5 defenses, especially with the talent that USC's has, don't perform that poorly. But alas, they did, and despite the fact that I predicted USC's defense to regress and the team overall to regress, they underwhelmed even my expectations and everyone's expectations nationwide. And I imagine for many of you USC fans, last season was painful. Lincoln Riley was pressured by performance, and I imagine by those within the program to make changes, which he did. And we're going to be talking about all of that today, along with trying to answer the question in one way or another: will USC improve in 2024, or is it least likely that they will improve? Or will they not? We'll try and give all the answers here on this episode with College Football with Sam. But welcome back, fellow football fanatics, and before we begin this video, please hit that subscribe button, click the notification bell so that you can get notified when the best Big Ten football channel on YouTube releases USC Football, Big Ten Football, or even sometimes goes out of the lane and looks at other conferences and college football content in general. Also, like the video and comment your thoughts on the state of the USC program down below and your record prediction for USC in 2023. And last but certainly not least, we have new t-shirts that dropped on the merchandise page, including a USC-themed College Football with Sam t-shirt, the link to which is in the description and in the pinned comment. You can find my merchandise store there and just click the t-shirts tab, and you will, after a few seconds of scrolling, find that USC t-shirt. Or if you're a fan of any other Big Ten team, you can find all of the Big Ten teams with their own themed College Football with Sam t-shirt. And also, make sure to check out the Patreon if you want to support the channel. Thank you to Crash2488 for sponsoring this video as a Heisman member. Thanks to Spencer Bringhurst, Chris Lane, and SFS Inverted for sponsoring this video as an All-American member. And thanks to Will Loftus, Gabriel Calendar, Roaming Gnome, Matthew Sale, Austin Christmas, Zubin Zah, and Janisha Cockrell for being all-conference members for the month of March. And one more thing, I know I've probably said that 2 or 3 times, but there are some polls that will be linked down in the comments section as well that include power ranking every Big Ten team and also telling me who you think will have the best unit on each side of the football: offense, defense, and special teams in the Big Ten. Your votes will be included in my Big Ten prediction video, which I have already done a lot of work and research on, and that will be out as soon as possible. But let's dive into USC football. And first and foremost, what I want to talk about is the defensive staff. That's what I want to discuss here. The defensive staff for USC last year was bad, to put it. It just was. Alex Grinch was, in my opinion, the worst Power 5 defensive coordinator on the face of the planet last season. And now he's gone. He's at Wisconsin as their safeties coach, thankfully not as their defensive coordinator. That would be the legend of Mike Tressel. But Alex Grinch just horribly mismanaged the program. USC had top 15 talent, top 10 talent, somewhere in there in terms of roster recruiting rankings. And being 121st out of 133 teams in scoring defense is atrocious. It's an atrocity. And statistically, the unit was just as unimpressive. They allowed 432.8 yards per game. They allowed 71 plays per game. A team like, let's say, Michigan or Georgia last season, or Texas when Jonathan Brooks was healthy, or Washington or Oregon. These are teams that had near elite to elite offenses, specifically in terms of running the football, or for Washington being an exception to the rule, they just pass to chew clock, which is kind of cool. Hopefully we can see that with Kalen DeBoer at Alabama. Those teams would eat this defense. They'd eat the whole team, chew it up, spit it out of their mouth. And in the case of a team like Michigan, who had the number one defense in the country, that would be a team that could probably blow out this USC team, much like Notre Dame did last year. That's how bad Alex Grinch in this defense was, that it weighed USC's offense with a generational quarterback in Caleb Williams, a underrated running back in Marshawn Lloyd, underrated wide receivers like Taj Washington, who is just an awesome story of constantly being an underdog. Now I bet he'll have success in the NFL. And talented wide receivers like Zachariah Branch, Deuce Robinson, Mario Williams, Brendan Rice, etc. All of that weighed down by an atrocious defense. A defense that also on average allowed 186.5 rushing yards per game and allowed opponents to rush for an average of 4.8 yards per carry. But alas, Grinch and most of the defensive staff outside of Sean Nua, who's been retained as the defensive ends coach, they're gone. Their reign of terror is over. The Inquisition has passed, and USC hired D'Anton Lynn as their defensive coordinator. They brought in assistants Eric Henderson, Doug Belk, and Matt Hentz to coach the position groups. Matt Hentz was a former head coach, by the way, for North Dakota State. North Dakota State winning multiple FCS national titles under his belt as a defensive coordinator and linebackers coach, as well as a head coach. North Dakota State went 60-11, 32-7 in the Missouri Valley Football Conference under Hentz's leadership, and they reached the national championship 3 times, won it twice. They always reached the quarterfinal or better. They were 15-3 in FCS playoff games, and he won Coach of the Year twice. To go from being a head coach of probably the best program in FCS to not even being a coordinator, just a position coach, and also an associate head coach for defense tag, but again, mostly being a position coach. That's a big hire. And Hentz is proven working at North Dakota State. That's a program that has, look, they've produced Craig Bohl, who coached well at Wyoming, just retired after last season. Chris Kleiman, who's at Kansas State, won the Big 12 in 2022 and has a 39-24 overall record. He was Kleiman's DC at North Dakota State. That's an elite program by FCS standards, and a program that I think would function quite well in the FBS. I want North Dakota State and good FCS schools like them, like maybe South Dakota State, who's won the past 2 national championships in the FCS, to join the FBS. Those would be programs who I think, with the right coaching, could function like a Chris Peterson, Boise State. But I don't want to get too sidetracked. The point is, these are big hires. Doug Belk produced 10 all-conference defenders while he was the defensive coordinator for Houston from 2021 to 2023. He had bad defenses in 22 and 23, but you could attribute that to the fact that Dana Holgerson runs an air raid program and is probably a lot like Lincoln Riley in that regard, where he just doesn't know what he's doing and doesn't really care on the defensive side of the football. Doug Belk coached a top 20 scoring defense in 2021, where Houston went 12-2. Their only loss was, I forget who they lost to in the regular season, but they lost to Cincinnati, who went to the college football playoff and won the American Conference that year in 2021. That was a good year for Houston, and he's produced NFL defensive backs like Marcus Jones, for example, who's had a punt return for a touchdown in the NFL, multiple kick and punt returns for touchdowns at Houston, even as a receiving touchdown, and was just a great college cornerback overall. I think the biggest hire out of all of these, outside of Lynn, obviously, and we'll get to him in a few seconds, is Eric Henderson. He's going to provide NFL-level coaching and a sense of leadership and development. Henderson has been in the NFL as a player for 3 seasons under the Bengals from 2006 to 2008, and he's been with, whether it's the Chargers for 2 years or the Rams for 5 years, he's been with the NFL since 2017. This is his first year in college since he was the D-line coach at UTSA in 2016. 41 years of age, playing at Georgia Tech, and being an undrafted player who played for many years in the NFL, 3 years, and played with the Las Vegas Locomotives, which is like I think it's like a much lower level kind of startup professional league. Don't know anything about them. This is a player who knows how to develop, who knows how to work hard, who's an underdog, and who's young, and who, with the Rams, has coached players, experienced players, but like Aaron Darnold, for example. I think that as the co-DC, D-line coach, run game coordinator, he'll bring NFL experience to players and also to coaches here at USC. And paired with D'Anton Lynn, who worked in the NFL from 2017 to 2022, I think that will be great. I think that having some NFL, I don't know whether you want to call it posture, body language, positioning, don't even know if I'm using the right words, but just that mindset and that feel, I think would be great for a defense that honestly was anything but professional level over the past 2 seasons. I thought Grinch should have been fired after 2022, knowing it was his first year, but at USC, I mean, even Clay Helton fielded better defenses on average than Lincoln Riley did, which is insanity because Clay Helton did not field good defenses at USC. But Grinch, alas, was kept along, I think, for a year too long, and now change was needed, and it's on the level of USC coming into a new conference. I think D'Anton Lynn is going to have success here in the long haul, but it will certainly be a rebuild. Lynn at UCLA led one of the best rushing defenses in the country, only allowing 80.8 yards per game, only 2.7 yards per carry. UCLA only allowed 301.5 rushing yards per game, and in total they allowed around 1.8 touchdowns per game. That's adding up the passing and rushing touchdowns on average allowed per game. Only allowed about 18.4 points per game defensively. UCLA's offense, though, last year was disastrous by Chip Kelly standards, only scoring 26.5 points per game on average. I love this defensive staff. I love Eric Henderson, love D'Anton Lynn, really like Matt Hentz. Doug Belk, as a defensive coordinator, I don't think has the greatest resume, but as a defensive backs coach and a developer of overall talent, I think has a pretty good resume. And Sean Nua, coming from a Michigan fan, he coached at Michigan in 2021 and before then as well, I think that he's a good position coach as well. So this defensive staff, much better than last year's. The offensive staff is overall the same, though USC did get a new running backs coach. I'm going to quickly search for his name here. New running backs coach in Anthony Jones Jr., who came from TCU. That part I do know, and TCU in 2022 and 2023 under Sonny Dykes did have a great rushing offense, and overall did have good trench play, particularly in 2022. So that is another good hire. Let's talk about some key questions before we discuss returning production and preseason S&P Plus power rankings and my overall feel about the team. Some key questions I think are along the lines of overall defense, quarterback, skill positions, and the offensive line. You can group quarterback and skill positions together because the returning production at all those places is pretty similar, losing a lot of star players, and quarterback is a sub-position of the skill positions, which are position groups that typically touch the football. Running back, wide receiver, quarterback. Tight end often is in that, but in some offenses, tight ends are mainly used as blockers, like Minnesota, for example. Offensive line's not a skill position. Some key questions here. Number one, how much will the defense improve, and who will be its key players? 7 players depart after an awful 2023, and this includes players who individually I think were good, but collectively the unit didn't perform. And that really circles back to the head coach. When you have a player like Kalen Bullock, who's going to be a first, second round pick, when you have Eric Gentry, who's just a beast, or a talent like Christian Roland Wallace, who succeeded at Arizona, when you have those players and your defense just spectacularly fails, that's on the coordinator and also by proxy the head coach. That's on the coaching staff, not necessarily the players. Kalen Bullock is a good player, probably will succeed in the NFL, and I am watching him. When I watched USC, watched the Notre Dame game, watched Colorado, watched them in week 0, I watched USC a lot because I knew they were joining the Big Ten in 2024 and I wanted to get familiar with them. But I also thought that they were overrated from the beginning of the year, and I wanted to see if I was right or if I was wrong. I wanted to know for myself and not just make a prediction and never come back to it. His defensive backs were getting torched all day. The defensive line was not holding up outside of pass rush, in which, Bear Alexander, a little bit of a thank you to Georgia. He was doing well in pass rush and getting sacks, and also at times at stopping the run. Really the best player on that D-line for USC last season. But with 7 players leaving, including Kalen Bullock, Eric Gentry, Christian Roland Wallace, Max Williams, Solomon Byrd, Keon Bars, and Austin Jones, he's actually a running back, so it's 6. But there are some outgoing transfers as well, like Tackett Curtis, who was a contributor. So you can say 7. It's a 7 really key contributors departing. How does this defense improve? By how much does it improve? And who are the breakout players? I look at, Damani Jackson leaving the program for Alabama, where he's going to get better development. But I look at someone like redshirt freshman Mekhi Lemon, who, according to ourlads.com, is second in the depth chart at corner. I look at Anthony Lucas. I look at Jack Sullivan, who's coming back for another season. Jamil Muhammad. Mason Cobb coming back, I think, was good. And to me, that was a bit unexpected. USC also is bringing in some transfers. Isaiah Rakes transferring in from Texas A&M, John Humphrey joining his former defensive coordinator and again now defensive coordinator at USC, D'Anton Lynn, cornerback from UCLA, Kamari Ramsey at safety transferring in, DeCarlos Nicholson transferring in from Mississippi State, Akili Arnold transferring in from Oregon State, Easton Mascarenas Arnold transferring in at linebacker from Oregon State, and Nate Clifton transferring in from Vanderbilt. Are these all going to be key contributing players? Will they be in the 2-deep? Will some of them fade out or fan out like we've seen with transfers at every school? What's the defense going to look like? And if you think you have answers, tell me down below. Same with any of these questions. How does USC manage losing Caleb Williams? That's another question. And also, how do they manage departures from Washington at Rice at running back and or wide receiver, and Lloyd and Jones at running back? How do they handle that? Caleb Williams is a generational talent. Won the Heisman in 2022, did not win the Heisman in 2023, despite putting up pretty similar numbers. Now, that's due to the overall wins and losses. He didn't have about the same amount of passing yards. He had almost 1,000 less passing yards, but he had an improved passer rating, 30 passing touchdowns, and a similar QBR, and he averaged more yards per pass attempt and an improved completion percentage. So averaging everything out and taking most of those statistics as pretty equal in terms of weight, he had a pretty similar year to last season. But his offensive line was worse. He missed Jordan Addison, and he had an inferior defense. So as a result, he wasn't on the field for as long. Couldn't produce the same numbers. And, I mean, losing a wide receiver like Jordan Addison, for example, is huge. Zachariah Branch is a wide receiver that in the future, probably this season, will be like a Jordan Addison. Just an elite, pure NFL body and mind receiver. Brendan Rice and Taj Washington were good. They were great. They were not elite. They were not a Jordan Addison. And that didn't help Caleb Williams. But Caleb Williams, covered a lot of holes in the drywall that was Lincoln Riley's offense. The offensive line just wasn't good. Marshawn Lloyd was healthy for much of the season, which is unusual for him. He's struggled with injuries at South Carolina, but the O-line really was not good. I can't express how bad it was. They allowed Williams to get sacked for 33 times this past season. USC's rushing offense It fell off, in my opinion, compared to the previous season, even though they had a better running back. It was just more inconsistent. Didn't show up when it was needed. And the system overall just looked broken. It looked loose, looked undisciplined, unprofessional. And Williams covered up a lot of that. Miller Moss looked fantastic in the bowl game, the Holiday Bowl. He threw for 6 touchdown passes, averaged well over 10 yards per attempt, and only threw 1 pick. He's not Caleb Williams, though. In order for the offense to produce at the same level as they did under Williams, the supporting cast will have to be good to compensate for the decrease in talent. Either that or Miller Moss is going to have to be a more disciplined and overall professional player, much more so than Caleb Williams, which I do find hard to believe, because even though Caleb Williams I don't think was the most put together QB in terms of pure execution, he was already executing at a very high level is a competitive player, and I think that like any QB going into the NFL, as long as he doesn't get drafted by awful management, he will probably succeed. And by any QB, I mean any QB with his talent, any QB that is being talked about as being picked first overall or second overall, and in that generational talent zone. How does Lincoln Riley and USC handle that? I mean, that's pretty big right there. So, new starting quarterback, new starting receivers. Lloyd departing, I think, is big. Now, Jaquavius Marks comes in, and he did well at Mississippi State, so that's good. It's good that Riley's continuing to use the portal. But that's a big question mark, and a bigger question mark than I think many are anticipating, even with Miller Moss performing well in the Holiday Bowl. And finally, the offensive line. Will the O-line improve? And by proxy, the run game. And to relate this to another program in the Big Ten, I would look no further than the Ohio State Buckeyes. Ohio State returns a ton on the offensive line. They return 4 starters. They bring in a former starter at Alabama and Seth McLaughlin, who will start at either center or guard. USC returns Mason Murphy, Justin Dedich, Emmanuel Prugan, Jonah Monheim. They lose Jarrett Kingston. USC doesn't bring in any offensive linemen in the transfer portal. That could change. They brought in a few during their 2024 high school recruiting class, but true freshmen at least rarely start in general. And in terms of outgoing transfers, they lost Michael Tarkin on the offensive line, Andrew Millick on the offensive line, but those were either backups or not very good, not USC level players or offensive linemen. With the majority of their production on the offensive line returning, majority of their starters, will they improve? That's a big question mark. And Riley's offenses at Oklahoma and at USC have succeeded when they can run the ball well. In 2018, they had two 1,000-yard rushers, including quarterback Kyler Murray, and that was arguably Riley's best offense, if not the 2017 offense. But the 2017 defense was much better. I think that helped that team be superior overall. But his offenses are great when he can run. And contrary to popular belief, Riley, despite running an air raid, likes to keep it balanced between the run and pass in terms of play percentage. In fact, he typically leans more run heavy. And in order for his offense to succeed, the O-line has to be successful. And in the Big Ten, especially in the interior, especially at guard and especially at center, because the Big Ten is an interior run conference. They are. The reason why Michigan, even this year when they had some issues at tackle, why they were able to win and dominate the Big Ten and even win the national title, is their interior offensive line was still elite, despite the drop-off at offensive tackle. Same reason last year, when their guard and center were better than their tackles in 2022. And Penn State, take a look at their O-line last year. Their tackles were very good. They had Olufashanu, and I forget the name of the player on the other side, but he was also good. The interior of their O-line, however, was not elite. And despite the fact that they had a near-elite tackle room, their lack of NFL-level play on the interior cost them against Michigan and cost them against Ohio State as well. So that's a big question mark, is the offensive line. Are they Big Ten ready, the Trojans, with the offensive line, with skill position questions, with questions overall on defense? And by questions on defense, I don't mean will they regress. I think last year's unit, even 2022's unit, are too awful for a D'Anton Lynn defense to be that bad. But the question is, how much will they improve? Because hypothetically speaking, USC could have the most improved defense in the country from 2023 to 2024, and it could still not be a top 25 unit. That's how bad the defense was. The Trojans, on top of all these questions, return only 50% of their production. Now, typically a team with low returning production will have tons of questions, but that's not all the time. An example is Georgia, Alabama, Ohio State, and Michigan returns less production than USC, but with the way they've recruited, developed, and how they've had some internal promotions from proven coaches, and they've been to the college football playoff the previous 3 seasons, they won it all last season, I'd say they have less questions than USC. And there are programs such as Nebraska who return a ton of production, but they have a lot of questions on offense, where they had one of the worst offenses in the country last year. USC has talent, yes, but because of the changes and because of where the departures are, returning only 50% of their production, which is good for 15th out of 18th in the Big Ten, I think that does draw some right to be concerned. And concerned in terms of meeting expectations. Even though USC is losing this much production, with their new defensive staff coming in, their use of the portal, their overall team talent, and the fact that they're a blue blood, USC will be expected, rightfully so, to compete for the Big Ten championship, or at least improve in terms of win-loss record compared to last year, whether that's 9 wins or more likely at least 10 wins, I would say. Their schedule's pretty tough. USC Football is ranked 23rd in Bill Connolly's preseason SP Plus rankings. They're estimated to be 11.5 points better than the average college football team. Riley and his staff are bringing in the 20th best overall 2024 recruiting class with 33 total commits. So, despite the roster attrition, they're using the portal well. They've recruited well overall. Have they recruited at an elite level? No, but Lincoln Riley classes are historically small, historically outside of the top 10. So they're recruiting at about the level that Riley typically recruits at. I think this is where we really get into my thoughts on this USC team, the 2024 USC team. I think that the offense is going to be good. It's going to be great. And I think overall it will be one of the lethal offenses. I think that Miller Moss will fit perfectly in the system as shown in the Holiday Bowl. I would expect the offensive line to improve. When the offensive line returns a lot of snaps from the prior year to the following year, you typically see improvement, even if the team overall takes a step back, because the offensive line is a position where you get a lot of injuries. It's a position where you need, part of me would argue, the most conditioning. It's a very important position and a very hard, tough position to play. Experience on the offensive line and toughness always pays off. A Big Ten team in Michigan State last year returned most of their offensive line from 2022. And despite the fact that 2022's team was better than 2023's team, the 2023 offensive line, I think, when they were healthy, this is just my personal opinion, was better than the 2022 offensive line, but for a variety of other reasons, including the Mel Tucker suspension and far inferior quarterback play and wide receiver play, that the offense and the team collectively overall was worse. So I think the offensive line should improve. Running back, I think, will be stable. Quarterback, there will, of course, be regression, but I think Miller Moss will be one of the best, if not potentially the best quarterback in the Big Ten. The struggles on defense, though, that's where most of the questions reside, is the defense. Because USC could have the best offense in the country, their defense could improve to be top 50, and with the schedule that they have, they could miss the Big Ten championship game. I mean, it is a tough schedule. And they could even miss the college football playoff despite making massive strides. Let's run through the schedule. They open against LSU on Sunday, September 1st. That will be a game that I am definitely live streaming. Definitely. Big game, a game that I'm very excited for, and a game that it's a matchup that I love. Big Ten, SEC, neutral site, and in terms of how these coaches are, they're completely contrasting each other. Programs, not so much. They have a lot of questions on defense. They're more proven on offense. But in terms of coaches and philosophy, in theory, they're more contrasting and perpendicular than they are complementing and parallel. They play Utah State after their game against LSU. Then they have a bye on September 14th. But they travel to Michigan September 21st, host Wisconsin September 28th. They play at Minnesota October 5th, host Penn State October 12th, play at Maryland October 19th, host Rutgers October 26th, play at Washington November 2nd. They have a bye November 9th or November 2nd. I hope I didn't say October or September for Washington State. They host Nebraska November 16th, play at UCLA November 23rd, and host Notre Dame November 30th. LSU, Michigan, Penn State, and Notre Dame are all ranked inside of ESPN's preseason top 25, more specifically the preseason top 15. That stretch with Michigan, Wisconsin, Minnesota, Penn State, Maryland, Rutgers, and maybe Washington, maybe Maryland as well. Maryland and Washington lose a ton of production and don't have the same reputation or returning depth that Michigan does at the offensive line. Those 7 games in a row, all of those teams could have anywhere from good to elite rushing offenses. And USC last year, I think that one of their greatest struggles was the run game. Because even though they allowed more passing yards than rushing yards, that's very normal. And even though their secondary got burned and was toyed with by Oregon and Washington, they were able to force interceptions and get sacks and do okay in pass rush. There was nothing good, nothing redeeming about USC's run defense last year. I mean, Colorado, for crying out loud, who had no O-line, was able to run on them. They were. And Washington looked like 2022 Michigan with Corum, Edwards, and Olu Oluwatimi. I mean, Dylan Johnson might as well have looked like Derrick Henry against that USC defense. I think that the schedule is just extremely tough. It is what it is. And this is especially in terms of matchups. I think that USC probably matches up better with Notre Dame and LSU than they do many Big Ten teams that will overall be inferior to LSU and Notre Dame. But because those Big Ten teams will have better running backs and potentially have better offensive lines, LSU and Notre Dame, though, will have good offensive lines. LSU might have an elite offensive line entering next season with their returning production. There's, with the schedule, with the questions, there's a lot of unknowns. I could see USC straight up not go bowling next year. I could also, if everything goes right, I could see them going 11-1. Maybe their ceiling's 10-2, but if they go 10-2 with this schedule, I'm telling you, they're making the college football playoff because this is a tough schedule. And a USC team with a good defense, and that's if everything goes right with the offense that Riley produces, they would be in play to win multiple college football playoff games and potentially go on a run. So high ceiling, low floor, I think is going to be USC this coming season. Are they Big Ten ready? I am going to say not quite. And in terms of will they improve next season compared to this year, I would lean toward yes currently. I don't know if you'll see it in terms of record because USC's schedule was tough last year, but there were cupcake games. There were. And USC also had a generational quarterback who could beat Arizona when Arizona should have won that game, or come out and play in a shootout against Cal, or get enough plays in the second half to pull away from Colorado, who was making a comeback. If those three close games turn into losses, and that's a big stretch because there were some close losses that USC also suffered, the Trojans go 4-8. And all of those games were one score, one possession wins for USC. So the Trojans could improve this year, but without the generational quarterback and with a schedule that I think doesn't feature any, and I mean this, any cupcake games outside of Utah State, they could actually be the same, maybe even get worse in overall record. But I think from a sense of power rankings, from a sense of program direction, identity, and overall play, I do lean toward them improving. I don't think they're Big Ten ready yet, but I think with this current staff, I'm pretty sure they'll be ready by 2025. It typically, with these staffs, takes a year or two with transfers for their ceiling to be totally realized. But with transfers coming in this year, and with how good the staff is, there's a chance that maybe this defense will be top 25 this season. Wouldn't bet on it, though. Something that I'll talk about in a future USC video. If you want to get an early preview of my true thoughts, including a record prediction, somewhat for USC, you can check out a Patreon article that I wrote a little over a week ago. I do think that Lincoln Riley, unless USC misses a bowl game and they look the same as last year, I do think he should return in 2025. And I don't think he should be on the hot seat unless, again, the team misses a bowl game. Because he made a mistake in keeping Grinch around, and I think that could cost him another double-digit win season. There's a good chance USC doesn't even reach 10 wins this year. I think even USC fans understand that's a good chance of happening. But I think all of these hirings are in the right direction. I think that he's shown the necessary changes. It's like Ryan Day. Although Ryan Day never lost 5 games in a season at Ohio State, but then again, they also have higher expectations and better talent. Ryan Day, after the loss to Michigan in 2021, made the right moves. Even if he lost to Michigan again in 2022, it would have been asinine to call for his head. So that's all I have to say in this video talking about USC football. Thank you so much for watching, and thank you to my patrons for sponsoring this video and the channel. Thanks to Crash2488 for being a Heisman member, Spencer Bringhurst, Chris Lane, and SFS Inverted for being All-American members, and thanks to Will Loftus, Gabriel Calendar, Roaming Gnome, Matthew Sale, Austin Christmas, Zubin Zah, and Janisha Cockrell for being all-conference members. Have a phenomenal day, guys, and I will see you all around. And if you're listening on Spotify, check out my YouTube page in the channel description, and also make sure to follow the channel. Have a great day.